The Israelis have not concluded what they're going to do in terms of a strike. That's under discussion. I think if I were in their shoes, I'd be thinking about other alternatives than striking oil fields. Look, the Israelis have every right to respond to the vicious attacks on them, not just from the Iranians, but from everyone from Hezbollah to Houthis. Anyway, but the fact is that they have to be very much more careful about dealing with civilian casualties.
That was U.S. President Joe Biden today, talking about how he's trying to help shape Israel's response as the situation in the Middle East edges towards an all-out war. Israeli forces say they struck 200 Hezbollah targets in a series of strikes overnight. The Israeli military has warned people to evacuate more communities in southern Lebanon. All of this as our government continues to urge Canadians to take advantage of the seats that they've secured on commercial airlines out of the region. Joining us right now is former Foreign Affairs Minister and Defense Minister Peter MacKay. He was Canada's Foreign Minister through the 2006 war in Lebanon, overseeing the evacuation of 15,000 people from that country. We're going to be connecting with him in just a moment. But joining me right now is Dennis Horak, who was Canada's chargé d'affaires in Iran from 2009 until Canada severed diplomatic relations in 2012. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Horak, we'll start with you on this. A number of nations, including Canada, continue to call for a ceasefire. There are reports, though, that Iran will only support one if it's backed by Hezbollah and combined with a ceasefire in Gaza. How much does that complicate things in the region?
I think it certainly complicates things, at least superficially, for Israel, that it increases the pressure for them not to respond. I think they're going to respond in any case. Depends on the terms of the ceasefire that is being presented. If it's a temporary ceasefire, I can't see Israel going for it. If it's a much broader ceasefire with changes for Hezbollah's posture in Lebanon, for example, moving back up north of the Litani River as is required by UN Security Council resolutions, then maybe we may be on a track, a bit of an off-ramp. But I can't see Israel not responding to what happened the other night.
We've also heard from Iran's supreme leader today. He was praising his country's missile strike on Israel. How worried are you that this will devolve into an all-out war?
The risk is there. There's no question about it. We'll see what happens how Israel responds, what sort of targets they go for. It's a target-rich environment, everything from military facilities to the nuclear program to oil facilities, perhaps even cities. And I think that will have an impact on where things go and where they spin out. I think Iran would probably respond. They've indicated that they would, and their credibility would be on the line. But how they respond, I think, will be a result of how Israel reacts in the next few days or weeks, or however long it takes for them to respond.
We know there are a number of players in the region right now who are trying to essentially, as we were saying earlier, including Joe Biden, trying to sort of shape Israel's response here. How effective do you think that has been so far?
Well, so far the Israelis have determined their own course of action at this point. I think certainly the Americans are engaged in conversations with them. The Americans have played an important role in helping defend Israel from missile attacks from Iran, and that's got to be a factor. On the other hand, Israel, rules have changed. The rules changed on October 7th. They changed on October 8th when Hezbollah started launching rockets from Lebanon, from South Lebanon, and Israel had to evacuate 70,000 people from northern Israel. So those are all changing the rules of the game. And Israel has determined its own course of action up till now. They'll listen to the Americans. They'll hear them out. They may alter course somewhat. For example, the U.S. has been very clear on not wanting them to hit the nuclear facilities. Whether that is going to change Israeli tactics, we'll see. But I think Israel is going to respond. They're going to respond hard. I think they feel they have to.
Mr. MacKay, we have you now, and I know you've been listening in a little bit to the conversation. How worried are you right now about where all of this is going?
Well, I share the concerns that have been expressed here. I think it's entirely likely that this could escalate and spiral. I think what we have seen already is somewhat measured, although that may not be the word others would use to describe it. But Israel has at the very least been tactical in the way that they have chosen to respond to both Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, for that matter. And they've been, in some ways, clever, doing their level best to straddle that line between protecting their own citizens and their own interests and sovereignty, but not bringing this to a whole new level. Hitting nuclear facilities, I think, would certainly significantly up the ante, if you will, in terms of the entire region and the possibility that this could become a broader regional conflict. But what we have seen so far is Israel attempting to listen to allies, including the United States, and most importantly, the United States, and not try to turn this into an all-out war. But, you know, we're dealing with individuals in particular coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran, where they are doing everything they can to provoke Israel into taking perhaps that next step, which then all bets are off, if I can use that expression.
Yeah, Mr. Horak, as somebody who served as our last chargé d'affaires to Iran, I mean, how much of a tinderbox is this, and how much, to what Mr. MacKay said, does it almost seem like Iran is looking for an excuse here to get involved?
I don't think that they're looking for a wider war per se, but I think what they want to do is they wanted to reestablish their credibility with their key allies, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with the Houthi even for that matter, and even across the region, other allies or supporters that they may have, that to not let the assassination of Hania, for example, in July, the assassination next to, as we saw, next to the Iranian embassy in Damascus, not let them go unanswered. They responded to the one in April. They haven't responded to Hania till the other day. And I think part of what they're trying to do is both establish that, look, we have your back, we support this effort, we are a reliable partner, and we will respond to attacks when Israel makes them. And so that's a major motivation for them. And that has risks of spinning out of control because, again, if Israel responds, then Iran will then need to feel a need to respond, and as both sides try and sort of reestablish their deterrent levels. So it's absolutely risky. And if we start seeing things like oil facilities perhaps being hit, then that runs the risk of Iran looking then to target perhaps Arab Gulf oil facilities, which they view as part of sort of the U.S. orbit, and then things can really spin out of control.
Yeah, and before that happens, Mr. MacKay, I know that the biggest issue for Canada and for Canadian officials is to try and evacuate citizens out of there. As someone who led efforts to do the same in 2006, how difficult is it to try and get people out of that region, especially when you consider some of them have deep roots there and some of them may feel like they want to stay there?
Well, that is part of the challenge, as is even locating. Many have not registered with the Canadian Embassy, as you know, and it's a broad, diverse country, and there are places that obviously the risk level is much higher. So it's a challenge. And using assets, we've deployed some people from the Department of Global Affairs and the Department of National Defense to help with the logistics of an evacuation. But the obvious answer was to get out some time ago and to heed the warnings that were coming from the minister and other governmental officials. If this war, if this conflict escalates, the risk level for the movement of people throughout the country to ports, to airports, becomes much, much higher. But just coming back to the reference to the way that Iran is interacting with its proxies. These are not country-to-country interactions. These are ideological terrorist organizations that are doing their level best to continue to annihilate Israel. And we can never forget that. We're not dealing state to state. We're not dealing with rational actors. The ability for diplomacy to prevail in this instance is extremely difficult. And that's a whole other level of challenge for those countries who wish to see the downing of weapons, the efforts to obviously see civilians protected. We are dealing with irrational actors on the other side when it comes to the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. Iran is at the epicenter of all of this. And most countries, including Canada, have limited, if any, influence or ability to influence in those terrorist organizations or with the Iranian regime.
Mr. Horak, I want to give you the last word on that. How difficult is this situation to even try and talk anyone off the ledge at this point, to Mr. MacKay's point right there?
I think he's right. It is very difficult. Each one of them, the various organizations, Hezbollah, for example, they've been severely degraded. They want to retain their place, their controlling influence within Lebanon, and Iran wants them to as well. So they will want to show their supporters, their sponsors in Tehran, that they are still a viable operation. So for them to back down, for them to, for example, accept a ceasefire that structurally changes their position within Lebanon, is going to be extremely difficult. It will take pressure. It will take perhaps more degradation of their capabilities, but I'm not overly optimistic that we'll see that anytime soon. But I think if we're looking for off-ramps, that's the first off-ramp I think that's available. And we'll see whether Iran wants to push them. Iran wants to accept, okay, you know, we've made our point and let's move forward. But unless there's some structural changes in how Hezbollah is set up in Lebanon, it can be nothing more than a temporary fix.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Dennis Horak and Peter MacKay, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.